The first shows that I worked was down here, man, around Houston.
Remember what
all over
locations you
Texas.
worked here in Texas?
Well, I worked Houston.
In the late hours of a humid Memphis night, 3 men crept through the shadows of Forest Hill Cemetery with shovels, a stolen van, and a plan so brazen it sounds like fiction. Their target was the most famous grave in America. Their mission was to pry open the marble crypt of Elvis Presley, remove his embalmed body, and hold it for a ransom of $10 million. And they very nearly pulled it off. Police intercepted the group just as they had begun breaching the mausoleum wall, and what should have been a footnote in criminal history instead became the catalyst for a chain of events that would raise questions people are still arguing about nearly 5 decades later. Because it wasn't the break-in itself that shook the Presley family to its core. It was what had to happen next. Elvis had been dead for barely 3 weeks. The world was still reeling. Over 80,000 people had lined the streets of Memphis for his funeral procession on August 18, 1977, and the outpouring of grief was unlike anything the country had seen since the assassination of President Kennedy. His body had been laid to rest beside his beloved mother, Gladys, inside a massive marble mausoleum at Forest Hill Cemetery. It was supposed to be permanent. It was supposed to be dignified. But the moment those 3 men showed up with their tools and their audacity, permanence was no longer an option. Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, was terrified. If someone had tried once, someone would try again. The grave was too public, too accessible, and too vulnerable. Within days, Vernon launched an urgent legal petition to the city of Memphis requesting something almost unheard of: permission to exhume both Elvis and Gladys and relocate their remains to Graceland, the family estate, where round-the-clock security could guarantee their safety. The city granted the request. And that's when things started to get uncomfortable. Moving a body from one resting place to another is not a simple act. It requires permits, oversight, official witnesses, and in many jurisdictions, a qualified examination to verify the identity and condition of the remains. The process is clinical, bureaucratic, and deeply invasive. When Elvis's coffin was removed from the Forest Hill Mausoleum and transported to Graceland's meditation garden, there were people present whose job it was to observe, document, and confirm that the body inside the casket was indeed Elvis Presley. Elvis and Gladys were re-entered in the meditation garden behind the mansion, side by side, surrounded by bronze plaques and an eternal flame. Graceland became not just a museum, but a pilgrimage site. Millions would visit every year, leaving flowers and handwritten letters at the foot of Elvis's grave. The family narrative was sealed as tightly as the tomb itself. But unofficially, a different story began to circulate almost immediately among people who were close to the process, people who had no reason to lie and nothing to gain from speculation. The whispers were strange and specific. Some claimed the coffin felt wrong, that the weight distribution was inconsistent with what you'd expect from an embalmed adult male who had weighed well over 200 pounds at the time of death. Others pointed to the unusual speed of the entire relocation, how quickly it was authorized and executed, as though the family was racing against something more urgent than grave robbers. And then there were those who quietly suggested that the real reason the Presley family wanted Elvis moved to private, secured, family-controlled ground had nothing to do with protecting the body from outsiders. It was about making sure no outsider could ever independently examine what was actually in that coffin. Now, to be absolutely clear, there is no confirmed public evidence that Elvis Presley's casket was empty or tampered with. No official who participated in the transfer has ever gone on the record claiming something was wrong. And the fact remains that from the moment Elvis was sealed inside that tomb at Graceland, the Presley family began constructing a fortress of legal barriers, sealed documents, and controlled access that went far beyond what any normal grieving family would require. The question that investigators, journalists, and obsessive researchers have been circling for decades is not really about what's inside the tomb. It's about why so many powerful people worked so hard to make sure no one could ever check. But the body-snatching attempt, as terrifying as it was, might not be the most disturbing chapter in this story. because some investigators believe the real reason officials were concerned about that tomb had nothing to do with grave robbers at all. It had to do with what Elvis Presley's own family was desperately trying to hide. And that secret starts not in a cemetery or a meditation garden, but on an autopsy table at Baptist Memorial Hospital, where a team of doctors saw something so damning that the Presley family spent a fortune making sure you would never, ever find out what it was. On the afternoon of August 16, 1977, Ginger Alden walked into the master bathroom of Elvis Presley's Graceland suite and found him face down on the floor. His body was cold. His skin had already begun to discolor. He had been dead for hours, alone on a bathroom floor while an entire mansion full of people carried on just beyond the door. This was the most recognizable man on the planet, and he had died in a position so undignified, so painfully human, that several first responders later admitted they didn't immediately recognize him. He was rushed to Baptist Memorial Hospital, but there was nothing to save. Elvis Presley was pronounced dead at 3:30 in the afternoon. And within hours, a battle over the truth of how he died had already begun. The Shelby County medical examiner, Dr. Jerry Francisco, stepped in front of the cameras that evening and delivered a ruling that stunned the medical community: cardiac arrhythmia. Elvis Presley's heart simply stopped beating. Natural causes, case closed. It was clean, it was simple, and it was exactly what the Presley family wanted to hear. But behind the walls of Baptist Memorial Hospital, a very different conclusion was forming. A team of pathologists had conducted a thorough private autopsy, and what they found in Elvis's system painted a picture that was anything but natural. His blood contained at minimum 10 different prescription drugs. Codeine was present at 10 times the accepted therapeutic level. There were sedatives, amphetamines, antihistamines, and opioid derivatives flowing through him in concentrations that, individually, could cause serious harm and, combined, created a cocktail that most toxicologists would describe in one word: lethal. Several of the doctors involved in that autopsy would later break ranks and publicly contradict Dr. Francisco's ruling, stating in interviews and depositions that the cause of death was not cardiac arrhythmia, but acute polypharmacy, a clinical term that essentially means he was killed by the sheer volume of drugs in his body. Instead of transparency, instead of accountability, instead of an honest public conversation about what really killed Elvis Presley, the family moved with surgical precision to bury the evidence even deeper than the body. Through aggressive legal maneuvering, the Presley estate succeeded in having the full autopsy report sealed, not for 5 years, not for 10, for 50 years. The complete medical findings from that autopsy are locked away until 2027, restricted from public access by a legal barrier so extreme it exceeds the classification period of most national security documents. Think about that for a moment. The United States government has declassified Cold War nuclear secrets faster than the Presley family has allowed the public to see what was in Elvis's bloodstream when he died. And the reason that decision carries so much weight is because of one man, Dr. George Nichopoulos, known to the world as Dr. Nick, Elvis's personal physician and constant companion. In the final 8 months of Elvis's life, Dr. Nick prescribed him more than 10,000 doses of sedatives, amphetamines, and narcotics. That number is not speculation. The man was eventually charged with overprescribing to Elvis and several other patients. He was acquitted in criminal court, though he later lost his medical license. But the question that has haunted researchers for decades is whether the sealed autopsy contains evidence so explicit, so undeniable in its documentation of pharmaceutical destruction, that it would have turned that acquittal into a conviction. Whether the Presley family sealed that report not to protect Elvis's dignity, but to prevent a criminal trial that would have exposed every person who enabled his destruction. 10,000 doses. A medical examiner who publicly contradicted his own hospital's findings. A 50-year seal on the truth, and a family that chose silence over justice. But if you think the people closest to Elvis failed him only in death, you haven't yet heard what they did to him while he was still breathing. The man who controlled every dollar, every decision, and every breath of Elvis Presley's professional life was not a colonel. He was not named Tom Parker, and he was not an American citizen. His real name was Andreas Cornelis van Kwijk, a Dutch immigrant who entered the United States illegally in the early 1930s and spent the rest of his life running from a past so dark that it shaped the destiny of the biggest entertainer the world had ever seen. Before he reinvented himself as the folksy, cigar-chomping Colonel Tom Parker, Van Kwijk left behind a life in the Netherlands that investigators have long believed included involvement in the unsolved murder of a young woman in his hometown of Breda. He never went back. He never applied for American citizenship. He never obtained a valid passport. And that single buried secret became the invisible chain around Elvis Presley's neck for over 2 decades. Because Colonel Tom Parker could never risk any official process that would expose his true identity, Elvis Presley never performed outside of North America. Not once. The biggest musical act in the history of the modern world never set foot on a stage in London, Paris, Tokyo, or Sydney. Offers poured in constantly, massive international deals worth millions that would have expanded Elvis's legacy into something truly global, and Parker killed every single one of them with vague excuses and misdirection. Elvis wanted to go. He talked about it openly with friends and associates. He dreamed of playing for audiences who adored him in countries he had never visited, but Parker could not allow it, because a single customs check, a single passport application, a single border crossing could have unraveled the fabricated identity he had spent decades constructing. So the king of rock and roll stayed home. Not because he chose to, but because his manager's criminal past made the entire outside world a threat. The financial exploitation was equally staggering. Parker extracted up to 50% of Elvis's total earnings, a commission so grotesquely inflated that after Elvis's death, a probate court judge formally ruled the arrangement had been a clear case of managerial exploitation. Parker didn't guide Elvis's career toward artistic growth or long-term legacy. He funneled him into a relentless assembly line of cheaply produced Hollywood films because they generated immediate, predictable revenue that Parker could siphon without scrutiny. Elvis hated those movies. He told people close to him that he felt embarrassed by them, that he wanted to take serious dramatic roles, that he wanted to evolve as an artist the way the world was evolving around him. Parker shut it down every time. The movies kept coming, the checks kept clearing, and Elvis kept shrinking inside a life that was designed to serve everyone except him. What makes this tragedy unbearable is that no one around Elvis had the ability or the willingness to intervene. Vernon Presley served as his son's financial manager in title, but in practice he deferred to Parker on virtually every meaningful decision. Vernon was a simple man from rural Mississippi who had spent time in prison during Elvis's childhood, and he was neither equipped nor inclined to challenge a figure as domineering as the Colonel. Priscilla, who genuinely loved Elvis during their years together, was navigating the emotional wreckage of their marriage and eventual divorce, consumed by her own survival in a world she had entered as a 14-year-old girl. The Memphis Mafia, that famous entourage of friends and hangers-on who surrounded Elvis at all times, were entirely financially dependent on his generosity. Every one of them owed their lifestyle to staying in Elvis's good graces, which meant staying in Parker's good graces, which meant never rocking the boat. Elvis was the most surrounded man in America and the most profoundly alone. By the mid-70s, Elvis knew exactly what was happening to him. He made scattered, heartbreaking comments to the few people he still trusted, saying he felt trapped, saying he wanted to fire Parker, saying he understood the pills were destroying him but couldn't find a way to stop. The learned helplessness was total and complete. He had been managed since he was 19 years old. He had never existed as an independent adult outside the Colonel's system. And so when that system finally killed him on a bathroom floor in Memphis, the machinery of control didn't pause for even a moment of grief. It simply pivoted. Somewhere in Memphis, Tennessee, locked inside a filing system governed by court order and guarded by decades of legal architecture, there is a document that contains the full, unredacted medical truth about what killed Elvis Presley. Every substance in his blood, every organ that had failed or was failing, every clinical detail that a team of pathologists recorded on the evening of August 16, 1977, while the rest of the world wept for a man they thought they knew. That document has been sealed since the moment it was created, and its scheduled release date is 2027. 50 years of enforced silence, finally set to expire. But whether the world will actually see what's inside that file is a question that no one can answer with certainty, because the same legal mechanisms that locked it away in the first place can be used to extend the seal indefinitely. Motions can be filed. Privacy claims can be raised. Judges can be petitioned. And the people who now control the Presley estate have every reason in the world to keep that file exactly where it is, buried. The death of Lisa Marie Presley in January of 2023 added a layer of tragedy and complication to this story that even the most hardened investigators didn't see coming. Elvis's only child, the one person on Earth who carried the most direct emotional and legal authority to unseal her father's records, died at the age of 54 from complications related to a prior surgical procedure. Her death was sudden, devastating, and it severed the last living link between Elvis Presley and the generation that had witnessed his destruction firsthand. Lisa Marie had spent her entire life navigating the impossible weight of being Elvis's daughter, oscillating between fierce protectiveness of his legacy and quiet, painful acknowledgement that the people around him had failed catastrophically. There were moments in interviews where you could see it in her eyes, a grief that went deeper than missing a father, a grief rooted in knowing the full picture and being powerless to change any of it. With her gone, control of the estate passed to her daughter, actress Riley Keough, a woman who loves her family deeply but who now inherits a burden she did not choose. The stewardship of a legacy built on a secret she may not even fully understand. Riley never knew her grandfather. She knows the myth. She knows the music. But the sealed autopsy, the pharmaceutical nightmare, the 50-year cover-up, these are decisions that were made before she was born, by people who are almost entirely gone now. And the question of whether she will allow the truth to surface or fight to keep it sealed is one that may define the next chapter of the Presley story more than anything Elvis himself ever did. And so we return to where this all began. That tomb in the meditation garden at Graceland. It sits beneath a canopy of trees, flanked by bronze plaques and surrounded by a low stone wall. Every single day, people from every corner of the world stand before it in silence. They leave roses, they leave handwritten letters addressed to a man who has been dead for nearly half a century. They cry openly and without shame. They believe with their whole hearts that they are standing in the presence of someone who changed their lives, someone whose voice reached into the deepest part of them and made them feel less alone. And maybe that's true. Maybe that's enough. It is the final monument to a betrayal so complete that an entire industry conspired across generations to make sure you never learned the full story. Elvis Presley deserved better than what he got. This simple truth echoes through the decades since his death, growing louder with each revelation about the circumstances that surrounded his final years. He deserved doctors who took their Hippocratic oath seriously, physicians who protected him instead of enabling his destruction or worse, actively poisoning him. The men entrusted with his health and well-being became accomplices in his slow demise, writing prescriptions that fed addiction rather than treating the underlying pain and trauma that drove him to seek chemical escape. He deserved a manager who genuinely cared about building his artistic legacy instead of one who systematically caged it for profit. Colonel Tom Parker, or Andreas Van Quyck, as we now know him, didn't nurture Elvis's talent or protect his interests. Instead, he constructed an elaborate prison of contracts, debts, and dependencies that kept the king performing like a trained animal, generating millions while being denied basic freedoms that ordinary people take for granted. Every decision Parker made served one purpose: maximizing profit while minimizing Elvis's autonomy and independence. Elvis deserved a family that chose truth over reputation, relatives who valued his well-being more than the glamour and wealth that came with being connected to American royalty. Too many people in his inner circle prioritized maintaining their comfortable positions and protecting the Presley brand over confronting the uncomfortable realities of his deteriorating condition. Silence became complicity, and complicity became a death sentence. He deserved to see the world beyond the stages where he performed and the controlled environments where handlers managed his every move. Elvis Presley, one of the most recognizable faces on the planet, lived a life of profound restriction. He was denied the simple freedom to travel internationally, to explore different cultures, to experience life as something more than an endlessly repeating performance schedule designed to satisfy Parker's financial ambitions and contractual obligations. Most fundamentally, he deserved to grow old. He deserved the chance to watch his daughter mature, to become a grandfather, to evolve as an artist, to find peace with his past and hope for his future. He deserved the opportunity that every human being should have, to live a full life measured in decades, not cut short at 42 by a toxic combination of negligence, exploitation, and possibly something far more sinister. And when that autopsy seal finally breaks, if it ever truly does, in 2027 as scheduled, the most terrifying thing we may discover is not the specific cause of death or the precise cocktail of substances found in his system. The real horror may lie in documenting exactly how many people watched his destruction unfold in real time and did absolutely nothing to stop it. How many individuals saw the warning signs, recognized the danger, understood that Elvis was dying, and yet remained silent? How many chose self-preservation, financial security, or simple cowardice over intervention that might have saved his life? The questions surrounding Elvis's death demand answers, and those answers may finally emerge when decades of official silence end. The truth about what really happened to the king of rock and roll deserves to be known, examined, and understood, not just for Elvis's sake, but for what it reveals about the machinery of fame, the price of exploitation, and the collective moral failure of everyone who watched a legend die.